the energy that's out there right now for the presidential race just like completely has changed. I mean, this past weekend, I was at two events that were relatively small in the district there, and it was standing room only. I mean, you couldn't find a parking space on the street.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to the latest episode of the Leader's Edge Politics and Risk podcast. We've got a special episode for you today. We are joined by Congressman Joe Courtney of Connecticut. Congressman Courtney has been a good friend of ours for many years. He was first elected to Congress in 2007, and he serves on the powerful Education and Workforce Committee, which oversees all ERISA plans. So he's got an influential voice when it comes to all the healthcare issues that we work on the group healthcare issues. But he's been a particular champion on preserving the tax exclusion for employer-sponsored insurance. So I think you'll really enjoy this conversation that we'll have with Congressman Joe Courtney. Congressman, thank you for joining our podcast.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
There's a lot going on right now. There's no shortage of topics to talk about. One of the first things that I always want to ask our guests on the podcast is the broad overview of from where you sit, of the legislative and political environment. And that is such a big question, such a broad net to throw out there right now. But I know that you recently endorsed Kamala Harris to be president of the United States. Would love to hear your take on how you think this is going to play out so far. There's probably going to be a big vice presidential announcement around the corner. What are your thoughts on that? What are you hearing from your constituents on this? I mean, it's just, you can't make this stuff up. We're in such a crazy environment. I would just love to get your thoughts on everything.
Sure. So, I mean, probably one of the most interesting ways that I've noticed the change that's taken place is, I drive around the district like all of us, when we're home, and the energy that's out there right now for the presidential race just like completely has changed. I mean, if you were like the Saturday before President Biden made his announcement, you'd go out to an event, and particularly if it was, supporters of the Democratic Party, you were just sort of met with high anxiety, and people who were just, what's going to happen, what are we going to do, hand wringing, and then literally and I found out at an event where the announcement came through on everybody's phones, and the atmosphere in the gathering, which was about, I'd say 25, 30 people, just like instantly changed to excitement. This past weekend, I was at two events that were relatively small, sort of house party type events in the district there, and it was standing room only. I mean, you couldn't find a parking space on the street. Just you could see it the minute you sort of turned into the neighborhood that was there. And so, I mean, to me, that really is, just sort of a microscopic view of what's happening nationally, which is that this race is just like completely changed with fundraising, with the voter registrations that's happening. And, clearly, the polls that we saw before the president's announcement, the drop off of interest, particularly with subgroups within the Democratic sort of party coalition, was pretty concerning, if not, an emergency that's there. And again, all of those groups now are sort of, back into their heads are back into the race. And I think, at the end of the day, this presidential contest is still going to be close, but there's no question that, on the Democratic side, this race has just completely been transformed in a positive way.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And you come in from an interesting district. Can you talk a little bit about the D to R ratio makeup of your district, what the demographics look like? And I'm assuming this helps your campaign. There will be down ballot impacts on this, but what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I mean, Connecticut, obviously from a distance looks like a dark blue state, but it definitely has a little more complexity the closer you get. And so if you had a map of the state and drew a line down the middle of it, everything to the right is the second congressional district, on the Rhode Island side. So it's a lot of small towns, suburban Connecticut, definitely much more purple than the major urban areas like Hartford, New Haven, Bridgeport, Stamford, Norwalk along the shoreline. And so we have to compete every 2 years. I mean, this is not a slam dunk district. And certainly, with the Harris candidacy, if you look at the pockets of strength that the Democratic Party has in Eastern Connecticut, whether it's the Storrs campus at the University of Connecticut, Eastern Connecticut State University, some of the smaller, sort of more urbanized areas like New London. Again, I just think this is going to have a huge impact in terms of turnout, voter registration. I mean, that is particularly true at the University of Connecticut campus, which really goes up and down depending on whether it's a presidential contest versus a non-presidential midterm. And all you have to do is look at the Obama years in 2008 and 2012 to see just the huge uptick in turnout that happened on the campus. I think that's going to be similar this fall. So, obviously that helps people like me, that are on the Democratic line. Chris Murphy, is going to run strong in my district. But, again, he's got the other parts of the state that, are just sort of a backdrop and support for his campaign. So, but, I do think it's really going to have a real beneficial effect in a place like Connecticut, and particularly in a purple area like mine.
Fascinating. I heard from a colleague earlier this morning that there was a moderate Republican, I think they call them patriots, we would call them frontline members, but who was previously up 7, and after last week, he's now down 12.
Yeah. Wow.
So the shift has been palpable, but it's just nuts to me that as we're having this conversation, it's only been a week.
Yeah. No,
so, you want to temper it a little bit. But the next big news wave is going to be who the vice presidential pick. Do you have any favorites on that list?
I sure do. Congressman Tim Walz, now Governor Tim Walz, came in with me in my class in 2006. And, we have stayed in touch, since he became governor. Again, I think he's done just an incredible job in that state in terms of dealing with really thorny issues. He's the guy who called out the National Guard, when there was rioting in Minneapolis. Trump is claiming credit for that. That's not true. Tim, who himself was a 20-plus year veteran of the Minnesota Army National Guard. He retired as a sergeant major, was a really strong leader. And I think, got a lot of support in the state for doing, what was a difficult thing at the time. But he's also advanced an agenda in terms of education, healthcare. His state has gone completely sort of free school lunch, programs, and, which the farmers out there actually are very strong and supportive. It's got probably one of the best business climates in America, if you look at the rankings that are out there. But his real strength is that he's just this incredibly down-to-earth, plain-speaking, funny, authentic person who I think can really lock in that Midwest block of states, Wisconsin, Michigan, Minnesota to a lesser degree because it is more Democratic leaning. But he can run even strong in places like Iowa and Indiana. I think he'll help in rural Pennsylvania. And if anyone's been sort of watching the last week, the guy's gone viral over and over again with some of his kind of impromptu speeches that are out there. He's definitely being vetted. He and I have been talking and texting each other, and I just think he really is a good sort of counterbalance in terms of the strengths that the vice president has, and he will work tirelessly. I think people will just love him when he's out there. All the rest of the candidates are great, don't get me wrong, but I really honestly think Tim would be just the perfect sort of gap filler for that ticket.
Yeah, it really is a great short list that they're looking at.
Yes.
I think next year, just to let our list, I know you're aware of this, but just to let our listeners know, next year, y'all are going to face a real funding issue, a real revenue problem. The first issue you're going to have to deal with in Congress is whether or not and how to raise the debt ceiling. We hit the debt ceiling again on January 31st. So we're going to go through all that debacle again with a very strong vocal voice on the left and the right saying whatever we do has to be paid for, cut spending, raise revenue, whatever. coupled with the expiration of all the TCJA provisions, which are going to expire in 11 months later, and to reauthorize those, that's going to cost $4.5 trillion, according to the CBO. And then you put that in the context of what a lot of economists are saying: we have 10 years to get our fiscal house in order, and if we don't, at that point, the debt to GDP ratio is going to be so upside down, it's no longer a safe bet to buy or to invest in the U.S. government. And so you think inflation is bad now. You wait till that happens. Point is, the government's broke. And as you all look at raising revenues, the number one revenue raiser on the books continues to be taxing employer-sponsored insurance. And as we continue to advocate for lowering costs to keep employers to stay in the game, because there are 180 million Americans that get their insurance from their employers, we talk about disruption. Taxing plans could be the straw that breaks the camel's back for a lot of these employers. And you've just been such a great champion on making sure that we continue to preserve the tax exclusion for employer-sponsored insurance. So we're so grateful for your leadership on that. But I would love to hear a little update on you on where that stands, because I know there's been some movement.
Sure. So, I mean, first of all, thank you for sort of framing, really what are issues that have to be dealt with, regardless of who's in the White House and who has the gavel in the Congress. These are just, must-do items, and they are, of a magnitude that, just can't be denied by people who maybe just want to kind of kick the can down the road. The expiration of the tax plan at the end of 2025, in my opinion, is going to be, both a challenge, but also an opportunity for Congress to go back into the Trump tax plan and fix what I still think is broken in there, in terms of some of the really, egregious choices that were made when that was whipped together in less than 60 days. If you go back and look at the chronology of the Trump tax plan. So, and to your point, that if people want to do a number of things, whether if you're on the right, you just simply want to extend those tax cuts, which again I think disproportionately share the top 1% and the largest Fortune 500 corporations at the expense of the rest of the country, or if you want to get rid of some of those tax cuts, you've still got to find offsets to pay for those changes that could take place. And again, there were parts of the tax bill, like the capping the deductibility of state and local taxes, which in a state like Connecticut and in the Northeast and in the West Coast, but frankly now even all across the country, is really starting to really dig into middle-class homeowners in terms of their property tax bills. And so that, those are, there are places in that law that, many of us really do want to get back in there and change it, but it costs money when you make those kinds of modifications. That's there. So as you point out, if you ask the Congressional Budget Office, what are the biggest sort of tax breaks that you can find that can pay for offsets in terms of possible changes that may come up when the Trump tax bill is debated, then the tax exclusion for employer-sponsored insurance is always listed by CBO as sort of right there at the top of the list. So again, as I think a lot of your listeners know, when employer-based insurance really became kind of part of the fabric of our country, going back to the World War II, when that was a way that employers compensated workers when price controls and wage controls were in place during the war effort. But now, fast forward 80 years later, it really is part of the fabric of our healthcare system, of work compensation. When CBO lists that as sort of a tax break, that's a very simplistic way to describe it, because it's really doing more than just sort of providing a special interest group or a small cohort of the population a benefit. I mean, this is a tax plan which benefits about 160 million Americans, who get their insurance through their employment, and to change it's going to have an impact on people of every income level. So you really have to think through when you're talking about capping the exclusion or eliminating the exclusion about what's the incidence, who's gonna take the hit for it. And I think the more you learn about this, we're talking about teachers and construction workers and people who work in restaurants. I mean, this is really middle class and working families that would take the hit if you cap the tax exclusion. And that's why we were successful back in 2017 with final passage in 2019 of rolling back the infamous Cadillac tax, which was part of the Affordable Care Act.
It's funny, elections matter and they make a difference. And probably those 3 weeks before Biden dropped out, everyone in Washington was really talking about it was going to be a Republican sweep, potential single party control. And I started talking with some of my peers about, okay, what does a reconciliation bill look like? Because that's probably what would happen. Project 2025, Republican Study Group, there's a lot of champions that would probably make sure that taxing plans was in a reconciliation bill. So it could have been disastrous. And now maybe not so much.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the roots of this proposal, Milton Friedman was kind of the godfather of sort of conservative Republican economics, the Chicago School of Economics at University of Chicago. He wrote a book in 2001, How to Cure Healthcare. And again, within that book, that's where this whole approach was laid out, that we should decouple health insurance from employment. The best way to do it is get rid of the tax exclusion, give people some sort of basic tax credit for buying health insurance, which was, really a fraction of the true cost, particularly in high cost parts of the country. And basically, according to his view of the world, then the individual and patient would drive the healthcare system. And again, it's really almost like a libertarian fantasy because, expecting people to sort of self-diagnose and make their own decisions about what kind of health insurance or health care they're going to buy is just completely unrealistic. Right. And what the employer-sponsored plan does is it spreads the risk, which is a fair way to allocate costs, and it also creates structure so that people can get help, particularly at the primary care early part of the system, so that their problems can be diagnosed and they can get quick care rather than you and I trying to guess what's wrong with me.
Right.
Right, exactly.
I was with Leader Jeffries not long ago and reminded him of this battle, and I'll never forget when I was talking to Speaker Pelosi about the issue, and she was like, Democrats are not in the business of taxing healthcare, full stop. I suspect that will continue to be the mantra, but we still have a big battle because it's all related to the fiscal cliff, which is around the corner.
Yeah. And where you started out is so important. This is not something where people are just kind of ginning up an issue or manufacturing it. The next Congress and the next president is going to have to deal with this. And as long as there's ideas floating around out there, people really have to think this through as we go into this election in terms of who are you voting for and what questions are people being asked.
Right. 2 quick questions. I know we're running out of time, but we ask all of our guests that join us these 2 questions. First, who's your favorite member on the other side of the aisle to work with?
So, I mean, actually, despite, and I think this, the sort of narrative out there that, it's all sort of completely tribal and armed camps on each side, there's more, interaction between members. And so, I work on the House Armed Services Committee, I think, as you know, because I've got a district that's, got the largest military installation in New England, the Groton Sub Base, and we also have a large shipyard that builds our Navy's nuclear-powered submarines. So I'm on the Sea Power Subcommittee. I was chair when the Democrats were in control. Now I'm ranking member. But my counterpart is Trent Kelly from Mississippi, who chairs the subcommittee now. Again, if you have the two of us together, you'd almost, find it comical, in terms of just the difference, just in terms of the way we speak with the accents. And, he represents a northern district in state of Mississippi. And, obviously I'm up in New England, and but we traveled together. We obviously work together in terms of the committee proceedings. It's a very collegial, bipartisan group. He's fun to be with. He's just a really good guy, and his wife Sheila is friends with my wife Audrey, and believe it or not, there is signs of intelligent life.
Yeah. What's the number one issue that you're hearing about from your constituents?
So again, there's the issues abound that's out there right now. Again, because of my district, national security and foreign affairs is something that is very much on people's minds, because you've got about 10,000 sailors who would be part of any sort of strategy or policy that's there. But honestly, just going back to your prior question, the one thing that you hear over and over again is people's real concern that our system of governing is really being threatened by the sort of toxic politics that does exist in Washington. I mean, as much as we do get along more than I think people expect on a personal level, the dysfunction is really now I think really starting to worry people. So right now we're in an early summer break. A week's worth of votes were canceled, and I actually have a fair number of farmers in my district, and the fact that the farm bill, which is usually considered a must-do to-do item, looks like it's just going to get ditched this year. I have a lot of farmers who are really upset about the fact that we're not going to deal with really important issues that really affect the sustainability of their operations that's there. And to the extent that there's late budgets, that affects people's concerns about their military pay. The shipbuilding budgets affect people's job security that's out there, and just the fact that we came close to even a default a couple of years ago. I mean, that affects the economy writ large. So realtors and people who are in very interest rate sensitive parts of the economy. So I mean, what people really are looking for is people who understand the fact that it's not a debate club down there. We're not there to just sort of perform art. We're there to actually get results, and that requires people to sort of just get back to what's important, which is results.
Right. Well, thank you for your time. We're really grateful for your leadership on all things. Look forward to working with you just as much in the future as we have in the past. Your team is great, and I hope you have somewhat of a restful recess around the corner, because I know it's going to be a wild year ahead of us. So thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Joel.